What is going on, everybody? Kyle Murray from FTN Daily back again with another By the Numbers week in review, taking a look at week 5 of the NFL DFS season. Going to take a look at some of the places where we went right, where we went wrong, see how some of our lineups shook out, and we're even going to review a subscriber's lineup that was sent in to me. He asked me to review it and take a look at it, and it's a pretty good lineup, so I'm going to take a look at that live here as we break down the slate. So week 5 was my best week of the season so far. It wasn't an amazing one, like nothing big. I did get a little unlucky over on Super Draft, or I guess I consider it unlucky. Maybe it's just not unlucky. I don't know. But you'll see. We'll talk about some of the Super Draft stuff that I had over there. I had 2 lineups in the top 20 on Super Draft this week. One was in the top 3 at the end there, and then I'll let you know how I fell down from 2nd to 9th to close up the day. But anyway, that's going to happen a lot in DFS where those bad beats will haunt you for a little bit. But anyway, we're going to take a look at DraftKings, see some of the top scorers, talk about that, and then we're going to take a look at a subscriber lineup, and then we're going to take a look at the Super Draft lineup. So let's hop right into it. So at quarterback, Kyler Murray, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. Those were the 3 most expensive quarterbacks, but the top scorers were Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, and Jameis Winston were the top 3. Obviously, you had, 3 of those top 5 probably weren't being played much at all. Maybe some people got to Baker a bit, but nobody in their right mind was playing Davis Mills or Jameis Winston. If you did that, props to you. Pretty good games, but they weren't played a whole lot across the industry, and they were ending up projecting for less than 1% ownership. So very low in terms of popularity there. But some of the biggest busts were Kyler Murray, who only put up 13. Trey Lance, who only put up about 15.5. I guess it's not like an end of the world bust if you did play him in cash and stuff like that, but if you paired him up with a lot of his potential pass catchers, like Debo was fine. Debo ended up scoring a rushing touchdown, so he kind of paid off that way. But overall, it wasn't really great. But other big busts were, I guess Darnold was the biggest bust of them all. Derek Carr was up there too, but not many people played Carr. But mainly, essentially, the quarterback position was either you played Herbert, you played Brady, or you probably were playing catch-up, right? So those 2 were obviously phenomenal. They both scored 40-plus fantasy points. And then after that, you only had one other guy that was really in consideration throughout the industry, score more than 25, and that was Dak. So obviously Dak just didn't even compete with Herbert and with Tom Brady. So that was the main problem if you did play Hurts. Prescott, if you played Hurts or Rodgers, maybe you were okay with Rodgers depending on who you paired him with. Like if you did pair him with Devontae Adams and Jamar Chase, you probably were fine. But overall, it was mainly Herbert and Brady or bust. That was pretty much exactly where you had to go, and especially if you're playing tournaments because so many of those 2 pass catchers had massive games. So that was obviously something that continued that correlation trend there. Top scorers at running back: Henry, Austin Eckler, Myles Gaskin. My goodness, Myles Gaskin went from playing less than 20% of the snaps in week 4 and not being involved in the passing game, not being involved in the running game, being benched, not even being the starter anymore. Came back week 5, caught 10 passes, 2 for touchdowns, led the team in touches, led the team in fantasy points. Yeah, so that was pretty much a day in the life of me if you rostered Jalen Waddle a ton like I did, and then you saw Myles Gaskin scoring twice. Waddle actually had a touchdown that he dropped. It wouldn't have counted anyway because there's pass interference, but he was wide open, probably because there was pass interference. But so it was. I mean, they were looking for Waddle at points in the red zone and in the end zone, but Myles Gaskin ended up being the guy that would do pretty much everything there for Miami. Alexander Mattison was the chalk du jour of the week, and he was pretty tough to get off of, in my opinion. If you saw my projection on him, I had him at 24 points. I thought that was going to be high, and it ended up exceeding that. So I had him projected as the second highest scoring running back on the slate behind Derrick Henry, and ended up finishing 4th. So it was pretty much just a tough spot for me to get off of Madison in general there. Kamara, Zeke, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, and Najee Harris all put in pretty solid performances as well. And James Robinson. Robinson probably could have had a better game, considering the fact that he had 140 rushing yards and a touchdown, but he didn't really get a lot of work in the passing game, which was a bit surprising. So especially considering they lost. I thought he would have more work in the passing game. Just wasn't really overly involved. I think he had 2 targets or something like that, but either way, still a good game from him. But out of the surprising plays from the top, none that were really surprising. Zeke obviously was a fantastic play. My best DraftKings lineup had, I think it was like 195 or 198 or something with Saquon, and I was really considering going down to Zeke because I thought Zeke would be lower owned, but I ended up just sticking with Barkley, and obviously that didn't pan out great. It would have been a much better day if I would have made that swap. Another surprising thing is Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt both paying off this price tag here. I mean, we saw the receivers, or I guess mainly Odell Beckham for the Browns, do absolutely nothing. He had 3 targets. David Njoku and Donovan Peoples-Jones did all the work for the receivers there. I think Rashard Higgins had a touchdown, but Kareem Hunt scored twice on the ground. Chubb had the 53-yard touchdown or something like that. So massive game for those 2 guys. And that was, the optimal outcome if you rostered. I don't think you rostered both, but maybe if you had exposure to both throughout your builds or whatever, that was probably the optimal outcome for them. I don't think we see another game where they both have more points than this combined. I think that was like probably as good as it's gonna get. I mean, the team scored 42 points. That's unless Chubb would have scored twice too. I guess that potentially could have happened. But yeah, it was just a weird spot, and they both went off. But as for wide receivers, Davante Adams, Mike Williams, Antonio Brown, Kadarius Toney, Mike Evans, Jamar Chase all went for 30 plus. Davante Adams was phenomenal. Had over 200 receiving yards. I think he scored once. Yeah, I think he only scored once, and he had 40. I'd have to double check on that, but only scored once and had 40. Mike Williams scored twice, including a long 70-yard touchdown, and obviously he had 39. So yeah, Davante Adams scored one time, 11 catches, 206 and a touchdown. Mike Williams went absolutely bonkers. He had 8 catches, 16 targets, 165 yards, and 2 scores. His second touchdown, I've never seen a wide receiver so wide open. It was actually remarkable. There was literally not anyone within 30 yards of him. It was crazy. But yeah, Mike Williams obviously had a big day, and if you had Herbert and Mike Williams, it was obviously a fantastic spot. One of my favorite correlations of the week that I wrote in my article, which I listed like 7 or 8 of my favorite correlations. I tried to rank them based on who I like the most. But Davante Adams and Jamar Chase, that was one of my favorite correlations. I did say Davante Adams or Aaron Jones and Jamar Chase. Aaron Jones also a guy who I thought got very unlucky. I mean, he had the 100-yard bonus. A.J. Dillon scored a receiving touchdown. You're not going to see that happen very often. So I think Aaron Jones was pretty unlucky. But pairing one of those guys with Jamar Chase, I thought was a phenomenal correlation play. And obviously Jamar Chase continues to look like the best receiver in the rookie class, which he was drafted to do so. So 6 catches, 159 and a score for Chase. Toney made his debut, not his debut, but his coming out party, I should say, in a big way. 10 catches, 180 yards or something like that. 187, I think he had, or 189 actually. So big day for Kadarius Toney. Antonio Brown scored twice. Had just a massive game in general. If you rostered a Buccaneer receiver, you probably didn't hate it. I believe Godwin had. Yeah, Godwin had 14. So, I mean, obviously, if you rostered Godwin, you were like, shoot, I could have had Antonio Brown or Mike Evans. But, 14 still not killing you. Obviously, you're not thrilled with it or happy with it by any means. But Antonio Brown, 7 catches, 124, and 2 scores. He was my favorite Bucs receiver of the day. And Mike Evans was my second favorite Bucs receiver of the day. So I felt really, really good about that decision and how I got to that conclusion. And honestly, it wasn't really much analytical stuff. It was primarily the popularity, right? I liked Brown more because he was cheaper, and I thought that he had similar upside, even though he was much cheaper based on what we saw in previous weeks with all of his targets, especially in that Sunday night game. So that's why I liked Brown. And then obviously the price discount, right? But Evans over Godwin was a fairly easy choice for me because of the ownership. Like, Mike Evans was sub 5% in some contests. Meanwhile, Godwin's up there 14, 15 plus in most contests. So, like, it's just so easy to just make that decision and play the lower owned guy and that's not the only team that has scenarios like that, right? Like for Arizona, you can see scenarios like that with the cheap guys, right? Like Rondale Moore had the big game this week for those Cardinals cheap guys, but if there was a week where he's popular, going to AJ Green or Christian Kirk makes sense. The Seattle guys, if you don't want to play both, play the lower owned one. Like, that can just be a way to really strategize and game theory out these wide receiver positions that we truly just don't know. Like, we can look at all the wide receiver cornerback matchup stuff we want. We can look at all the Obviously, in my opinion, I think target shares are more reliable than matchups and stuff because that's just assuming like you're going to see like it's not even like a guarantee that that receiver is actually going to see that cornerback. And I get like the likelihood is better based on these matchups, but volume is typically going to translate week over week for a lot of these receivers, especially when it's been a 3-4 week sample, right? It's easy to kind of determine who's going to continue to get the volume. However, you never know what the game plan is going to dictate for whatever receiver. You never know who's going to be the guy to score. You never know, like sure, you have projections and research and tools and all that stuff that can help you get a better estimate at that. But when at times it's like a 50-50 between Mike Evans and Godwin being the guy that week, but the public isn't treating it like that. Like the public was clearly on Godwin much more than Evans. It's easy just to go on the other side of the token there and just hope that you're on the good side, right? So a lot of times just playing that game theory perspective makes more sense than really anything else because it just gives you a significant advantage. But all right, on the tight end, we finally had another tight end over 20 points. David Njoku is the fourth tight end this year to score 20 plus points on the main slate. He had a big game, 7 catches, I believe, 170 yards or something like that. He had like a 70-yard touchdown. Guy went absolutely bonkers. He had 7 catches on 7 targets, 149 and a score. Massive game for a guy who's a backup tight end. Like it's very tough to predict. If you got to David Njoku, hats off. Hunter Henry had a good game. He's looked really solid. He had 8 targets again. I believe 8 targets in back-to-back weeks for Hunter Henry. And obviously he did score again in back-to-back weeks. So Hunter Henry shaking out as a nice little tight end option this year, apparently. But overall, I will say 19.5, potentially like his ceiling-ish. I mean, maybe he goes off and scores twice one game or whatever. But again, like just not a lot of tight ends have the ceiling that like few tight ends have. Dalton Schultz, Donald Parham, Dan Arnold, Evan Ingram. As you can see, nobody worth paying up for on this slate. The only guy that was worth paying up for was Darren Waller, and he put up 8 points. So yeah, it was just a spot to really save salary there at the tight end position. And Darren Waller just been very unimpressive the past 4 weeks. After week 1, he's been bad. He's been just not a massive part of the offense like he was in week 1, and also just not good. So that's something to note. Like maybe Darren Waller isn't. If they're not going to use Darren Waller like they were last year, maybe he's not on Kelsey's level like I had been assuming, and obviously that's going to change a lot of things. And luckily I was able to kind of get off of a lot of Waller, because if this was the slate landscape in week 1, I'm probably very high on Darren Waller because I just think that he has the ability to just blow the rest of the tight end position away. I still think he has that, but if it's not going to happen as consistently, then that strategy of just paying up for him above all else is really going to fail at times, especially on slates like where you had so many top end scoring running backs, so many good receivers. Like that's going to be something to monitor, but a lot of good value options in this week. So Ricky Seals-Jones was popular. He was fine for min price, 9 points, much better than Evan Ingram. I mean, they scored basically the same points, but again, Evan Ingram was fine too. Like, don't get me wrong, Evan Ingram was fine, but Evan Ingram was just a play I was never ever even like remotely considering because he was going to get so popular. Alex had him in his single entry ownership at like 30%. No thank you on Evan Ingram at 30%. And he did get up there in a lot of contests, so no thank you on that one. Much rather play a guy that's 700 cheaper. Still popular, Ricky Seals-Jones was, but he was 700 cheaper. Obviously scored the same amount of points, etc. So, and was about I think half the ownership or so. But yeah, overall tight end just not a pretty spot. Defense, we had the Titans D who scored 13 points, and they were 3,800. They scored a touchdown on the first drive of the game and scored 13 points. You can get that same production from teams that are $1,000 cheaper, like the Cowboys, 1,600. Bad math. 1,600 cheaper, like the Eagles. Like this is kind of the reason why paying down is so evident, and it's kind of, I'm guessing that if you've watched this video more than probably once or twice, you're seeing that this has been a pretty recurring thing. We've seen a couple of times where there's been a couple of defenses that are just a lot of very far ahead of the cheaper defenses, but overall it's not going to be something that's going to be consistent and predictable, and that's why spending down and not playing chalk defenses is going to be something that I continue to like to do. But okay, let me try to figure out how to pull up this this image here. So this was a one from a few weeks ago, so ignore that one. Here we go. All right. I thought I did this before. I did not, but here we go. We're good now. Look at that, on the fly. So shout out to Tommy 252 for sending this lineup in. He talked to me about why he did certain things and how he got to the build, and he mentioned that Tampa Bay was #1 stack in my article, so he went there and he did the exact thing that I did. Played him with Evans and Brown, which was, I thought, a great call. Played Ricky Seals-Jones to save some salary. Got Devontae Adams in there, fantastic. Alexander Mattison, chalk value stud of the day. DeAndre Swift, great play. And actually, DeAndre Swift and Madison actually correlate pretty well. Like a lot of times people will say, a running back probably won't correlate that well with a running back from the opposing team. But in Swift's case, when he's the only guy on that team to likely do much, it does make sense. And also when a guy has that kind of work in the passing game, but it doesn't need to just be passing game, right? Like we saw James Robinson and Derrick Henry correlate pretty well because James Robinson is one of the only guys that really does much in that offense. But DeAndre Swift is like the guy in that offense. So that was a good correlation there. He did mention he got to Odell, which is obviously a bummer. But if I told you that Cleveland scored 42 points, you probably would have been thrilled with Odell Beckham at 2%. I mean, there's just nothing that you can do about it. And that's kind of what I go to say about certain things, like when receivers get so chalky, right? Like, if a receiver is going to be 30, 40% owned, there's definitely ways where he gets 2 targets, 3 targets, and like Odell. I mean, sure, there's some receivers that's never going to happen to. But, like, Chris Godwin, for example, he was my main example from the earlier segment. So, like, is that going to be a guy that we know is going to get 8 targets a game? Maybe, but is that a guy that we know is going to, score 20 plus every week? Absolutely not. So, like, should he be, like, significantly more popular than someone like Mike Evans every single slate? I don't think so. So now, like, Odell Beckham, guy had 26% of the targets, 25% of the targets through his first 2 games there in Cleveland. And now we found a spot where Baker Mayfield threw, let me double check on this, but I believe Baker Mayfield threw the ball like 35, 40 times. And we see 3 targets from Odell. Like, it's just, that's why you need to be careful with certain popular players. And that's why it's always going to be volatile stuff. But again, at 1%, I guess just under 2%, if I told you you're getting Odell at 2% at 6K while he's had 25% of the targets, the last 2 weeks, and the team's going to score 42 points, you would be thrilled with that. You'd probably do it 10 times out of 10. You probably wouldn't even second guess it, right? At least you probably shouldn't. I mean, sure, it didn't work out, but again, those are just the spots where I think that was just the spot where variance really hurt you there. Obviously, Njoku had a big game. Both running backs combined for 3 touchdowns. Rashard Higgins scored. Donovan Peoples-Jones had a big game. So, like, it was just probably more unlucky than not for Odell. And I also think that there might be some injury stuff there. The shoulder injury, obviously returning from the torn ACL. But either way, like, still, even with all that stuff, 25% of targets the last 2 weeks, team scores 42 points. He's under 2% owned. You probably like that spot 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10. So overall, I think that was a really, really good lineup. Odell was the only one that kind of hurt you there. And I could say, I mean, you could have paired up Adams with Jamar Chase. And obviously that lineup quickly turns into a monster lineup. You score 250 plus. But again, like, I don't think it's a spot where you can really fault yourself for playing Odell there. And again, if you have all those details prior to the slate locking, you're probably really happy with it. So overall, I think it's a solid lineup. Let's head back over to the screen share and check out the super draft stuff. So on the right was my top scoring super draft lineup. I don't know why it's showing the one that's in 8,000th place. It's just kind of exposing me there. But all right, so in 9th place, Justin Herbert lineup. Paired him with 3 Chargers pass catchers, which I typically don't do a whole lot, but I was okay with it with Justin Herbert. I was okay with it with two guys, Herbert and Brady, and that was it. So it ended up happening here with Herbert. Brought it back with Nick Chubb, Alexander Mattison, Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney paired with Ezekiel Elliott, which I really liked. That was a nice one there. But a little bit of a bad beat here, guys. I didn't have Eckler in this lineup. I was sitting in second prior to that Eckler touchdown. And Eckler got pushed into the end zone by the opposing team and scored. So we dropped from second down to ninth. So yeah, that was just a bad beat story that I thought I would share, and that'd be fun to share. But had two in the top 25. This is another lineup that I had here. Herbert paired with Allen and Williams again. Who Allen also just didn't really have that big of a game. But tight ends continue to be the end of me on SuperDraft. I just can't seem to get them right. The top tight end on SuperDraft, well, in the top lineup was Darren Arnold. Conklin was up there. So yeah, SuperDraft's been fun to play. I'm not gonna lie. So if you guys are interested in getting over there on SuperDraft, you can use promo code FTN to get 100% deposit match over $100. They'll match all of it 100%. So you should do that. And I believe it's an instant match. So very good deal there. Can never complain about free money. But that is going to do it for this episode of By the Numbers Week in Review. Appreciate you guys all for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow on Tuesdays. And I've been doing a lot of Week in Review stuff on Mondays and Tuesdays of the Optimal, the new show that I've started up that is centered around the optimizer and other tools and like DFS strategy and stuff. So those shows are free every day, Monday through Friday, either at 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern time. And they're live on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. So anywhere you want, you can check those out. If you guys are ever free and you want to hop in that chat, shoot some messages, shoot some questions, we can talk about that stuff. But this will be it for tonight's episode of Week in Review. We'll see you guys next week. Good luck in Week 6, everybody. I'll be back for some Week 6 content as the week goes on. We have NBA starting up, so get in on that as well if you're interested. All right, good luck, everybody. See you guys next time.